Hi, my name is Joan, and this is a cry for help. I have been terrorized by a demonic entity for over a month now, feeling if I asked for help it would terminate my life. And now, I'm exhausted. I can't sleep or eat. I constantly hear voices in my house, surrounding me, following my every move, and my everyday life is like a strong dose of nightmare fuel. I feel as if I were carrying a 2-foot boulder on my shoulders when I walk, and when I lay down, it's like 1,000 pins and needles are buried relentlessly in my tired body. And the smell, oh God, the smell. I can't do it anymore. The purpose of me writing this letter is for whoever gets a hold of it. Help me. Help me, and help everyone else out there. And this is my story. It all started on the last week of September a month ago, since my grandpa's funeral in an even smaller town was roughly a 2-hour drive from where I live. I had been at my grandpa's for about 3 or so days, maybe more. He was the only family member, in addition to a cousin that I didn't know, left of my father. He had been really sick for months, and the same day my father and I arrived at his hometown to check on him, he passed away. His last words to me were, "Be careful," in Spanish, and I wish I knew what he meant that night, and maybe I could have avoided what has turned into my worst nightmare. While I was there, I met a cousin of mine, Pablo, the only one there. He was very quiet and an odd young man. Fairly good looks, but too into his own little world. He was always silent and wore black all the time. He had scars all over his arms and legs, and I'm sure he had them through his whole body. I tried talking to him many times, but he wouldn't even bother looking at me. And he would just nod. His eyes were always covered with his long, dark black hair, and his skin was so pale. He spent the vast majority of the day chatting on his cell phone. He would hardly move from his spot on the couch, unless he was in his room, and I never even saw him eat or drink anything at all. I assumed he was just going through a depressive state, maybe. My grandpa was all he had, after all. To help him was basically the reason I was so insistent in building a bond with him. He was my only cousin, and being that we were family, I felt it was my responsibility. Several times, when he was not glued to his laptop or his phone, I had seen him read a small black book he would always carry around. When I asked him about it, he pulled back and hid it in his pocket. This only made me even more curious, and since I assumed it was easier for me to get his attention off a book than off his phone, those were the moments I became more insistent. And apparently, this strategy of mine made him mad one day, and he ran out of patience. He looked at me for a second with angry eyes, and I thought he was going to punch me in the face. And instead, he breathed in and then exhaled, making his frown warp into his everyday bored features. He then said that he would like to text me sometime, and thinking that he had finally changed his mind, and that was a great chance to get to know each other, and maybe even help him deal with his grieving. I agreed and I gave him my phone number. That day, I sent him a message saying hi. Ironically, we were in the same room, a couple of feet across from each other. He looked up and smiled, but he ignored and returned to his business. He whispered something to himself, and then I received a message from him. When I was already thinking on what to reply to my expected simple hi in return, I opened the conversation. And to my surprise, all I received was a message in a foreign language. I hit translate and waited for the app to do its magic, but it froze. So I turned off the phone and tried again. I looked at him and laughed, just thinking it was a joke. I then wrote "very funny" on another texting app and hit send. Immediately, both check marks turned blue, but no further answer, ever. The problem with the app persisted the entire day. I abstained myself from asking him directly and let the phone die instead. The next morning, I was able to open the app and read what I had received out loud, not understanding a word of what I was pronouncing. Out of curiosity, I copied the message and looked it up on my web browser. It turned out to be some sort of prayer to some demon in Latin. And here's what I got. And I'm going to write the Latin part and also translate it for you, roughly. Hello, Satan. Praise Satan. Lucifer and Satan in the name of our highest. Hell, the star cannot control the great king. Did glorify and adore you kinds of powerful adversary. Again, it's a rough translation. I assumed it was one of those chain messages your friends send you to scare you, and I simply ignored and decided I wouldn't try to speak to Pablo anymore. The remaining part of the day seemed to be normal, and even though I had sleep paralysis that night and couldn't really rest due to strange noises, that was the last of my nights that were closer to normality. The next night, I also had sleep paralysis, which I recall only had happened to me twice prior to the message. I managed to wake myself up, despite the struggle. But the rest of the night, I couldn't sleep because of the same strange noises from the prior night. This time, I paid close attention and determined the noise came from the room next to mine. It was Pablo's room. I found the noise to be creepy in a way. Heavy breathing, scratching, small childish laughter perhaps, although I couldn't really make it out through the walls. I thought that maybe he was purposely trying to keep me from sleeping, so I decided to put an end to his childish behavior. I got up in the absolute darkness of the room, not knowing where my shoes were, and tempted the drawer with both hands. I managed to grab my smartphone and shed some light on the room. As I approached the hallway, the noise cleared up. It seemed that he was praying, but I couldn't understand the mumbling noises. He exhaled deeply and occasionally let out small giggles. And at that moment, I felt fear, but I decided to approach anyway. I couldn't bear another night without a good rest. When I reached his room, I noticed a dim light came from under the door. I grabbed the doorknob to verify if it was unlocked, and it was. And so I slowly opened the door slightly, and I peeked in. And what I saw inside was so disturbing, I begged God to help me forget the image. Pablo was sitting naked in the middle of a star inside a circle made of what seemed to be white chalk on the floor. He had a razor in his left hand and was digging it in and out of his legs so fast, the blood delayed in flowing out of his body. His small moans suggested it was really hurting, but he wouldn't stop. Each time a new stream of blood would direct itself to the stained carpet, he would give out a ghoulish laugh, and at that moment, I couldn't move. I felt my blood flow through my veins and the adrenaline rush screamed for me to run, but I didn't. I couldn't. Some unknown force had glued me to the floor, and just when I realized hot tears were now blurring my vision, Pablo turned to look at me with eyes so wide they seemed lidless. He turned slowly and fixated his eyes directly on mine. I was beyond frightened. I could swear my heart stopped for a minute or two, but I still couldn't move my feet. I tried to look away. The stare was so terrifying, I would have preferred acid in my eyes. He then slightly tilted his head to the left and smiled. A macabre smile that pierced every inch of my soul, threatening to give me a heart attack. And I literally felt as if my soul was being sucked from my body, and every single drop of blood had been washed away. The terror was rapidly building up inside of me, and I swear I was going to catch fire. I needed to scream, I needed to cry, but I couldn't. And that was the moment when I broke. The next day, I woke up. The bed was soaking in sweat and my hands were trembling. I found out that I was half naked and my whole body was sore. At this point, I was scared. I was horrified. I began scanning my body with my hands in an attempt to locate the source of a stinging pain I felt. But there was nothing. I realized it was coming from inside me. It was coming from underneath the skin of my torso, just where my heart was located. To the palm of my hand it only felt warm, but in reality, it felt like fire was burning my organs. I got up and looked at myself in the mirror. I looked so different, and I felt so empty. My eyes were now both surrounded by two black circles. That bright, happy-looking woman was gone. Standing in front of the mirror was only her soulless body. Everything else had been replaced by some sad living ghost of her once beautiful living self. And that morning I ate breakfast, showered, and changed. Force of habit. I laid in bed for the remainder of the sun's light. And then the voices came. The voices that would apparently haunt me for the rest of my miserable forthcoming life. Some voices were male, others female. Others were even childlike, but none of the voices sounded human. They were just too hoarse, sounded more as if they were crying and yelping than speaking. And as of today, they still follow me around. However, they now speak my language. Sometimes they tell me to kill. Sometimes they tell me bedtime stories. The kind of bedtime stories that do the total opposite of those you would tell a child. They won't let me sleep, and if I do, I only wake up in sweat due to horrible vivid nightmares, or I have sleep paralysis. Smiling, putrefying faces staring at me in my desperate attempts to wake up. Now I tried telling my father, but all he would do was stuff me with pills. He was devastated by my grandfather's death. I tried my best not to bother him, but I was still scared. What was happening to me? There was nothing else for me to do but to blame Pablo for what was going on in my life. I tried to confront him. Despite my newborn fear towards him, I demanded an explanation. All he did was stare at me for a long 5 seconds, straight in the eyes, and told me to obey. He pointed at my smartphone in my hand, repeated, "Obey," and gave me a barely noticeable smile. I slapped him in the face. Crying, burning tears, confused, I tried to yell, but I couldn't. I tried to attack him, but I couldn't. I was dead inside. And all I did that day was cry. The next morning I found him hanging from his bedroom ceiling with his black book's ashes on the floor. A whole month, a whole shitty month I was stuck in that old, dirty town. Crying, yelling inside, cutting my wrists. I wore nothing but the black shirt I bought there and worn out jeans. I stopped reading and calling my friends, even though I was always stuck to my phone screen. Since the day it all started, every day has been twice as horrible. In addition to the voices, I started feeling things. I mean, the touch of something or someone. And sometimes, it was as if a hand would go down my back or ruffle my hair. And sometimes, I can even feel my feet being touched when I go to bed. And after returning to my hometown, I was a completely different person. My father was also acting different, but I knew it was only his grieving process. The day we arrived, I received the first of many messages to come. Pass the prayer down. It was a message from Pablo's phone. I was so shocked I threw the phone across the room, cracking the screen. I yelled and pulled my hair out. I was going crazy. But something made me walk towards the phone. Something made me grab it. A force was making me see that message. I couldn't close my eyes. I couldn't change the screen. I couldn't even blink. And so, I tapped resend. I resent it to my father. I swear to God I didn't want this to happen to him. It was not me in control of my body. Please understand, I'm not crazy. I was possessed somehow, I swear. I tried calling the police when I found him laying on a puddle of blood spattered through the bathroom floor. I tried, but who in his right mind would believe me if I said he alone pushed that screwdriver up his nostril? Who would believe me? They would have taken me to a prison, to an asylum. The next thing I did was try to put his popped eye back in and take the screwdriver out. As best as I could. I cleaned his body, the blood, and the basement. I filled the basement with candles and prayed all night for 3 nights. From the night I covered him with the soil from the backyard, he started talking to me. He has joined the voices in my head. His putrefied body is unbearable now. I can't stand the smell. This is too much for me. I admit, I have attempted suicide, but I can't. I keep receiving messages from Pablo's phone, messages telling me to pass it on. And they insist day and night, and they get angry. They throw things across the house, slam the doors, and pull my covers. And I will not do so. I will not pass that wicked text down for it to continue its horrendous acts. The prayer is the reason my father died. That prayer is the reason I'm rotting inside. Please help me. I beg you, do so. I will keep resisting, I promise. Although I have to say, I can't understand how, after I wrote this to you, everything seems to have calmed down.